Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Ahmed Dents, Director of Venue Experience at San Diego Repertory Theatre, and welcome back to another episode of We Are Listening, whether you are watching with me live or you are watching this on either the Rep, YouTube, or Globes YouTube pages in the future, or you're listening to this as a podcast. Welcome to this space. Of course, for those of you coming back, this is the space where we celebrate the lives and work of Black creatives, artists, administrators, workers in the performing arts. And our mantra, we are not the other, we're the standard. We've been here. And tonight we're going to really get a look at that. I'm not going to keep you too long tonight, but tonight's show, we are going to be focusing on the African Grove Theater, or the African theater that began in New York City back in the early 1800s. We're just going to go back, take a quick look at that, look at some power players and who started this theater, the competition of the theater, and why that theater came to an end. Before we get started tonight, as always, we got to start off with our land acknowledgement. So let me get to that very quickly here. Let me add this to our stream. As you can see the image here, this is at sdrep.org acknowledgement. San Diego Rep would like to acknowledge that the Lyceum Theater is built on the traditional lands of the Ipai Tipai Kumeyaay Nation, translated as the people who overlook the ocean from the cliffs. We also want to recognize their neighbors in the region, the Payam Kowikum, the Kawiha, and the Capeno tribes. San Diego Rep honors the over 20,000 current tribal members living in our area and elevates local elders past, present, and future. We respectfully acknowledge these community members for their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their wonderful stewardship. You can read this acknowledgement further in full and take a look at this map at our website at sdrep.org/acknowledgement. Again, tonight we are going to be talking about the African Grove Theater, or the African Theater. Real quickly, this is the first show that we have gotten into since we have started Black History Month. Sometimes you guys have heard me talk about Black History Month. That's almost like saying it's water month for me. Like just the month of February. So I want to recognize water. Now, this is all year round, but I do want to just give a little bit of, as we're here and this is Black History Month, I do want to give a little bit of an acknowledgement about Black History Month. Black History Month has a definite beginning, and it did not start with the United States government. I'll come back to this slide in a minute. This is a tweet from Dr. Greg Carr, professor of Africana Studies that I follow very deeply. And this does sum up Black History Month. The first day of Black History Month, a reminder that Carter Goodwin Woodson envisioned this as a brief period where we know, started off, let me interrupt my quote reading this for a minute. It started off as a week or two celebration by Carter G. Woodson. Let me start over. A reminder that Carter Goodwin Woodson envisioned this as a brief period when we note, celebrate, and inform others on what we have learned about our history all year round, from March 21st, 2021 to January 31st, 2022. Just replace the years every year as we go along. Remember, this is not a month just to jump up and say, hey, this is the month to talk about what we've learned about Black history. Black history is American history. It's U.S. history. And speaking of Carter G. Woodson, two books that I want to suggest to you as we are talking about the foundation of Black History Month, started by Carter G. Woodson. Two great books that I really would suggest that you read. The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, and The Education of the Negro Prior to 1861, the history of the education of the colored people of the United States from the beginning of slavery to the Civil War. I really do suggest that you pick up these books if you're looking for some books to read this month. historically speaking, the miseducation of the Negroes, the miseducation of the masses. So the miseducation, of those who were coming out of slavery, those who were in bondage, those who were considered Negroes in the United States, that's also a travesty and a miseducation for all of us, to be completely honest with you. So again, check those out. The Miseducation of the Negro, The Education of the Negro Prior to 1861 by Carter G. Woodson. He is the beginning, Mr. Woodson, of Black History Month. In this couple minutes, we'll get into talking about the African Grove Theater. But before we do that, let me get into some announcements very quickly. As you know, San Diego Repertory Theater is produced by San Diego Rep in partnership with the La Jolla Playhouse and the Old Globe. And I would like to just cruise around to these organizations very quickly, show you what's happening at their websites and at their theaters. Began just the other day, just a couple days ago, Friday, beginning of February 5th at the Old Globe, Trouble in My Mind. This is being performed at the Donald and Darlene Shiley stage at the Old Globe Theater, the Crown Red Priebus Theater Center. It is written by Alice Childress, a classic, directed by San Diego Rep and San Diego Black Artists Collective friend Delicia Turner Sonnenberg. Again, that started on February 5th. Will be running through March 13th. Make sure you head on over to the oldglobe.org and get your tickets for that. And then over at La Jolla Playhouse, kicking off on March 8th, it is Banging It, a banging new musical, music and lyrics by Sam Wilmot, directed by Stafford Arima. This should be another spectacular offering from La Jolla Playhouse. Head on over to lajollaplayhouse.org to check that out. Also wanted to remind you that coming up here at San Diego Repertory Theater at the end of the month, February 24th, it is a 4-day extravaganza. It is the 30th annual Kumbah Fest, presented by the African American Advisory Council of the San Diego Rep and San Diego Urban Warriors. This is going to be 3 days of just spectacular plays and learning and workshops celebrating the Black and African culture. Again, this is the 30th annual Kumbah Fest, happening right here at San Diego Repertory Theater at the Lyceum Theaters. You can buy your package tickets right now at www.sduw.org. Individual tickets will be on sale at sdrep.org any day. So make sure you come on and join us again. 4 days. It's a family fun affair. Make sure you head on over to our website, check out all of our information about our COVID policies. But this is going to be another spectacular weekend to round up the month of February and Black History Month. And then coming up here at San Diego Repertory Theater, beginning on March 3rd, it is the Great Con. This is an NNPN rolling world premiere. This is a spectacular play, a great story. I absolutely love it. I love the portrayals in here. This is written by Michael Gene Sullivan, directed by Jess McLeod. Tickets are on sale now. Again, this kicks off on March 3rd, so please go ahead, head over to sdrep.org and get your tickets. And a companion announcement to go along with the Great Con. Make sure you come back and join my partner in crime, me and Jacole Kitchen, as we will be joined on February 21st, right here, same time, 6 p.m., by author, blogger, teacher, actor, playwright, author of The Great Con, Mr. Michael Gene Sullivan will be joining us right here on We Are Listening. Make sure you mark your calendar. It'll be live on San Diego Rep's Facebook and YouTube page. Set a reminder, either one of those. And don't forget, you can catch all of the old episodes. I'm behind on the podcast, I'm sorry, but you can catch all of our most recent episodes, such as our conversation with Gina Jackson at SD Rep, at San Diego Repertory Theater's YouTube page, Facebook page, and along with La Jolla Playhouse's YouTube page. So let's get into tonight's episode. So again, I always talk to you about our mantra, here at We Are Listening, as we do sort of express and bring out the views of theater creators, performers, administrators, founders that, identify as Black or African American, share our experiences. My mantra is that we're not the other, we are the standard. We've always been here. We know that Broadway is called the Great White Way. We've been in this racial reckoning that doesn't seem to be too much reckoning going on, but we've been in this after George Floyd, where we've had a lot more attention paid to theater artists and creators of color. That is the time that we are listening is born out of, but I don't hold too much to the aesthetic or the thought that we are the other. Like, we've always been here. And tonight we're going to take a brief look at a theater company that is as old as theater in the United States. And it's tragic how it came to an end, but it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's fitting and it makes sense. So tonight's show, again, let me bring you up the slide to show you the artwork for tonight's show. We are going to be talking about the African Grove Theater, aka the African Company. This company was actually started in 1820. So yeah, that's where we're going back. We're going back to 1820. Let me share my screen here. Again, a lot of these websites, like, this is history that's hidden in plain sight from us. It's here if you're willing to find it and if you're willing to look for it. And as we're sitting here coming out of whatever you want to call it, post-pandemic, almost out of the pandemic, the tail end of the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, and still recognizing the myriad of issues that are going on in theater, not only with COVID, but with representation and, with gender equality and just things that are happening across the board, from Broadway to regional theaters to small theaters. As we look at what's happening, this is still a very important time theater to understand where we've been so that we can have a clear look at where we're going. If we want to stop the nonsense, we're going to have to take an open look at the history of theater, where it started, how these inequities started, how these inequities still continue today in inherited sense. And number one, that starts with history. Again, Black history is American history. They're inseparable when it comes to the social structure of the United States. And again, tonight we are talking about the African Company, aka the African Grove Theater, founded in 1821. It is considered to be officially the first Black or African American theater troupe in the United States. Of course, there are many, many other attempts at theater here in the United States that involve pantomime, coming out of the trying to take it out of the minstrel show type of thing and really express, the talent and the talent and work of theater among Africans and African Americans of that time. Again, the African Company was known as the first Black theater troupe. There are those who started before that. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of William Henry Brown. Now, William Henry Brown was a steward on a ship, but because he had traveled, he was on a ship, and because he had traveled to the Caribbean, he picked up and learned theater and art through all these travels, especially his travels in the Caribbean. And as we've always talked about, I said, what is theater if it's not narrative, right? And where did narrative start? Narrative always started with the elders, the storytellers, the jollies, the griots, whatever the word is of whatever native civilization you want to go back to, right? It was always the handing down of information. It was always the telling of stories at the campfire or the congregation. It was always these stories that became what they were. They became performance. They became folklore. They became what we handed down, right? And so through William Henry Brown's travels through the Caribbean, being a steward on the ship, he once he got to New York and settled down in New York, he decided this is what he was going to do. Now, he didn't start off with a theater off the top per se. He started off really trying to entertain. Again, this website, for those of you who are looking, if you're looking, I'll try to run off the websites and still try to figure out a really good way to hand off these links to you. Again, this is a website that I go to pretty often. It's called Black Past. It is not just about Black theater, it's about Black history, but you can find a lot of resources about the history of Black theater makers, actors here at Black Past, blackpast.org. And you just go to blackpast.org, just put in the African Company or African Grove Theater, and this will come up. Now, again, what William Brown first tried to do was just find a way to offer a variety of entertainment to his neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. He tried to offer, if we're looking at Black Past, he sits there, he tried to offer a variety of instrumental and vocal entertainments on Sunday afternoons in his tea garden. He had a sizable house, and he would draw a big audience from all 5 boroughs in New York City. In doing that, he gained quite a following. Like, a lot of people really came to watch what he was trying to put on, to watch the shows that he was trying to produce. Got a really big audience, like I said, again, from all 5 boroughs. Even had a lot of white people starting to come watch what was going on. And once he realized he needed to move into a bigger spot, that's exactly what he did. He moved onto Mercer and Bleecker Street into a house with a spacious garden, and he converted the second floor to a 300-seat theater, and that's when he renamed the African Company to the African Grove Theater. Now, when you're looking this stuff up, don't confuse the African Company with the Royal African Company. The Royal African Company was the one that was making money off of shipping slaves all around for tobacco and all kinds of crops. So don't confuse the Royal African Company with the African Company, which will later on become the African Grove Theater. If you're looking at the picture here that we had as the first that we had as an artwork for this episode, this is actually James Hewlett, a very spectacular actor of the time. This is a drawing of James Hewlett as Richard III at the African Grove Theater. Richard III was the first show that really opened up things at the African Grove Theater. And also, there'd be another young man who studied under Hewlett and Brown at the African Grove Theater, and his name was Mr. Ira Aldridge. Now, we all know, we all have heard the name, at least, of Ira Aldridge, right? One of the most famous Black artists, actors in the history of the United States. And he studied at the feet of Brown and Hewlett at the African Grove Theater for reasons that you can obviously think of later on. Ira Aldridge becomes a star in traveling overseas, to England and Europe, because it's just not hospitable for Blacks to do or try to start theater in the United States. Go figure. And again, this also from Black Past. Ira Frederick Aldridge is the first African-American actor to achieve success on an international stage, and that's because he had to leave the United States. It was just too contentious, especially in New York City at the time in the early 1800s, to try to put on theater. But again, these are the 3 big names that are synonymous with the African Grove Theater: William Henry Brown, James Hewlett, and the incomparable Ira Aldridge. Now, again, to give you a little bit background on William Brown, who was the playwright and founded the African Grove Theater. Again, he was born in the West Indies, where he worked as a ship steward. And once he retired from that work, he settled with the community of Blacks in Lower Manhattan. That is the area that became known as Little Africa, for reasons that you can imagine. Now, as the African Grove Theater went on to achieve notoriety and to be able to bring in a mix of racial communities, to actually come and watch the show. And you have to remember the time this is. Everyone talks about how the North was such a haven. Slavery was not formally abolished in New York until the late 1820s. So this is still living in an area where there's slaves in the North and freed Black men and women in the North. So this is still this is still very treacherous times for Black people in the United States. Let's not get it twisted just because we're talking about theater in New York. This is a time before slavery was abolished in New York. So, Little Africa has that. It means Little Africa. This was the area to where people were congregating and living, some free, some not. William Alexander Brown himself was free. He was a free man, and of course, he was studying and trying to make the theater be what it is. And like I said, he did have a competitive spirit, and he wanted the African Grove Theater to be the best theater. He wasn't the first. He wasn't the first troupe to officially try to start this and get this going, but definitely was the biggest. Like I said, here they'd meet, perform in the backyard, needed a bigger space. He moved to North Bleecker and Mercer Streets. Now, you're also going to know, and maybe you've heard of the Park Theater. The Park Theater was operating around this same time in New York City. And I'm trying to get you to understand is the success of William Alexander, or William Henry Brown. Sometimes he goes by, sometimes he's known or written as William Henry Brown. The success of James Hewlett, the success of Ira Aldridge really, really just got under a lot of people's skin. Another great article you can see here. This is at Journeys at Dartmouth, EDU, Ira Aldridge, and the Adolescence of the African Grove Theater. And just to tell you about how, when we're thinking about times, how we just think of theater, I don't know. I think there's just this thing in our head that theater has just always been one of the most civilized spaces in United States history or United States entertainment. And it's just not always the case. Look at this quote. This is from Journeys at Dartmouth, EDU, Adolescence and the Adolescence and the African Grove Theater. Just check out this quote here. The African Grove Theater and Company had to be mobile when they started doing plays because the police were constantly raiding their performances and pressuring them to stop conforming. Due to the rowdiness of white members of the audience, Willem Oliver states that the company of Black actors, all over states, that the whites had initially found it curious and amusing that a company of Black actors was attempting to do Shakespeare, but that later they became very hostile. They became very hostile because this theater became very successful and drew a lot of attention. And people from, like I said before, from all over the 5 boroughs started coming to check out what was going on at the African Grove Theater. The African Theater attempted to remedy the situation by creating a partition area for whites at the back of the theater, but the hostile whites continued to create disturbances, which eventually closed the theater. I want you to understand this, what we're talking about here. This theater was attracting so much attention, and at first it was funny. At first it was funny to the other white theater goers and practitioners around. They thought it was funny that these men were coming up with whatever they had to make these, whether they were making these costumes out of curtains or whatever, but they thought it was really funny that this group of Black men, free Black men, were attempting to do Shakespeare. Once the attention started getting on them and more people started watching, it wasn't funny anymore. And what happened was, as you realize from a lot of different accounts, it wasn't just organically that things started happening. These things started being planned. So riots and disturbances started being planned at the African Grove Theater. And if you think about that, again, at this time, this wasn't whites segregating. This was the African Grove Theater drawing in so many crowds, even though they had moved from their home base where there was more Black crowds, and now they're in Manhattan. They're getting closer to the Park Theater and these other theaters. They're drawing such crowd now. White people and Black people and all these other cultures now are coming to watch these shows that the white theater practitioners and those in there started causing disturbances at the African Grove Theater. The further on this article says the theater's management justified the audience segregation with, and this is the actual article, I'll show it to you in a minute. Whites do not know how to conduct themselves at entertainments for ladies and gentlemen of color. And I know that sounds funny, right? And I hope I didn't erase it. I had an actual from the Library of Congress. Here it is. This is an actual book review. I found this at the Library of Congress, but I also found it here at jstr.org. This was the actual this was an actual article in this book, volume 89, number 2, African Americans in the Urban Landscape, but written by Marvin McAllister. This is actually white people do not know how to behave at entertainments designed for ladies and gentlemen of color. Again, the African Grove Theater was so successful that they themselves, the Black practitioners, the Black owners, the Black founders, had to start segregating the audience because white audience members were starting to come to the shows and be so disruptive, so angry. They started staging events to bring the theater down. They started staging fights, staging disturbances of the peace so that the police would come and try to shut performances down. This is what was going on. And what really was the tipping point as we look at the history again of the Park Theater in Manhattan. Brown, Hewlett, Aldridge, they're feeling themselves, and they should be. They have a successful thing going on, and why not? They actually rented out a space not far from the Park Theater and put on the same performance, King Richard III, and started drawing bigger audiences to their productions than what was happening at the Park Theater. And you need to understand, this is in the 1800s. Not only were these Black men playing these roles, trying to play Shakespeare, these were also roles who, because the smallness of the theater, even though it's so successful, it's still small as far as, actors and the technicians, women were playing roles of men. There was gender swapping going on in portraying these roles, but they didn't care. It was all about the art. But this is when the folks at the Park Theater really couldn't take it because, well, the Black folks were doing Shakespeare better than them, and they're getting bigger audiences, and they weren't just Black folks. And so again, now the drama is upped, the disturbances are upped, and actually, the African Grove Theater at this location of Bleecker and Mercer, it starts in 1821. It's a short run. And by the time 1823, 1824 rolls around, there's a lot of stories about how the theater came to an end, but it came to an end after a series, again, of disturbances and eventually a fire. This is what leads this particular incarnation of the theater to shut down and have to move again. This is what eventually leads Ira Aldridge to leave the United States and head over to Europe to entertain there. And we understand the history of that. That's a history that continued all the way up to, sometimes till now. That's a history that continued further and further and further, all the way up into the improvisational jazz age, where you hear artists who are going over to play in Paris, play in France, just because they're treated much better than they were here in the United States. And again, that's why Ira Aldridge leaves, goes to Europe, eventually moves to Glasgow, begins studies over there, and this becomes a legend. But he can't become that legend here in the United States just because, well, the white folks here in the United States weren't having it. Why do I want to talk about the African Grove Theater? Again, it's just understanding, in this time of, coming off the tails of We See You White American Theater, and coming off of all, and even now, as we look at the political landscape that's happening here in the United States, so much of history is being played with. So many people's emotions are being played with along, racial lines. And it's just, if we don't have the understanding and the grounding of the history that came before us, especially right now in theater, the performing arts, if we don't get this right, we're in for a rough start. We keep hearing Broadway is back. We know a lot of these smaller independent theaters, they've been going. They're going through the pandemic because they always knew how to move with less. They always knew how to move with less funding. They always knew how to move with less press. And they always knew how to improvise. Then it seems like for us, the bigger theaters, we're trying to figure it out. How do we come back and get back to normal? There is no back to normal. People have learned the lessons. People value themselves in a greater way. And that goes from the house staff to the actors, to the directors, to the writers. Everyone values their work more and wants to see it be put out in the right way with the proper representation. And it's a biblical principle. The worker, the workman is worth his hire. Like, people want to be paid rightfully for what they do and what they contribute, and they want to be recognized for what they contribute, and they want that recognition to be in the right way. And so, but how many people don't understand that this theater, people of color in theater, like, well, let's just go down the line of where we've been with notes so far. Like I said, I'm not going to keep you much longer, but oh, one thing I did want to share with you, which I just thought about as I'm getting ready to wrap this up. What was another thing that was so significant about Brown is starting the African Grove Theater, or the Africa Company. And I remember I told you he was a steward on a ship. He was born in the West Indies and he traveled through the Caribbean. And his most notable play was called The Drama of King Shotaway. And it was based on the life of a Black Caribbean leader by the name of Joseph Chotier, who led a revolt against British rule. So again, we keep hearing the question that gets echoed and answered and answered and echoed and repeated, right? Should performing arts organizations be social justice organizations? Well, if you're looking at the term of social justice of what it means today in the Instagram sense, of being a social justice warrior, wanting to be seen for that, well, that's one thing. But if you're about the truth and narrative, if you're about the truth and stories, if you're about telling the truth and representation, and if you're about, looking at the real truth about what goes on in this industry that we're in and where we've been from the beginning to where we're going, where we are now, to where we're going. Again, we talked about the first note session. We talked about Lorraine Hansberry. We don't have a Raisin in the Sun if Lorraine Hansberry's father is not fighting the Supreme Court to put an end to race covenants. And if he's not an entrepreneur, and if he's not trying to find housing for Blacks in his neighborhood and extend beyond the neighborhood that his Blacks are confined into, if he doesn't go through that Supreme Court, if she doesn't see that as a child, we don't get Raisin in the Sun. We don't get that. Do you understand what I'm saying? We talked about the House Committee of Un-American Activities and the Federal Theater Project, and how on the lines of race and culture and gender, the Red Scare that we're kind of living through another one right now, just on the flip side, the Red Scare was used to anything that promoted multiculturalism, any type of entertainment that promoted multiculturalism, that promoted a blending of the races, that promoted any type of gender inclusivity. The House Committee of Un-American Activities made sure to get away with that, did away with the Federal Theater Act, and put the squash on the Negro units and all that federal funding that was going in to help make theater, not just regional theater, neighborhood theater, so that people could represent themselves on stage and grow in this thing. The House of Un-American Activities put a squash to all that. And then again, we're seeing here now with the Africa Company, successful successful beyond all rights that it should have been at the time, to the point to where they figured they could go head to head with competition, not to where the whites had to segregate it, to where the black people running the theater company had to segregate it, because the whites who were coming to watch had become so unruly. The such establishment rights at the Park Theater next door could not understand that black theater professionals were putting on the same play as them with less, but doing more and bringing more audiences and wider audiences. It couldn't be handled. And so you're looking at one of the main inspirations of William Henry Brown is in the Caribbean. His first play that he writes, most notable play that he writes, is this story of a Black Caribbean leader who led a revolt. And so again, it's the telling of narrative, it's the handing down of stories, it's the acting it out. Sometimes over generations it become grandiose, but this is where we are. And so again, just want to share with you another brief piece of history from theater that you might not have known about. Again, we're talking about the Africa Company, or the African Grove Theater, again founded by William Henry Brown. James Hewlett, first star of Richard III at the African Grove Theater, who was student under James Hewlett, and William Henry Brown, again, was the incomparable and legendary Ira Aldridge. And so just another moment for you to take a brief look at history and understand where we've been over the years here in this incarnation of theater, where we're going, why the representation is so important. It's not anything new. It's something that's tried to be squashed from the beginning. And how can we really have an open dialogue? How can we really move forward in American theater at this point with what we know, if we don't recognize what was going on in the past? So again, I'll throw it to y'all. Do your own research, check it out. It's okay. This is what we're doing here. I'm not a teacher. I have no teacher credentials. I'm just a human being on this planet who works in this industry, who knows a little bit of history about it, who comes up with more history about it every day. And I just do my part to share that with you on this platform. We are listening. So make sure you take some time to get your reading up. Read about the African Company, aka the African Grove Theater. And again, as we were talking about Black History Month, one more reminder before I go. Again, this is Dr. Greg Carr, professor of Africana Studies. The first day of Black History Month, a reminder that Carter Goodwin Woodson envisioned this as a brief period when we note, celebrate, and inform others on what we have learned about our history all year round, from March 1st to January 31st. And with that being said, also my two book suggestions that I really suggest you pick up the next time you want to grab some books, please. Carter G. Woodson. They might be hard to find. I have to order them. You're probably not going to walk into a bookstore and find them. You might be able to get them in Barnes and Noble or something, but I suggest you really order them. And if you can, order them from a Black bookstore. So order them from a Black bookstore. They're out there. You can find them. You can search online. You don't have to give Amazon all that money. Again, Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro, and The Education of the Negro Prior to 1861, A History of the Education of the Colored People of the United States from the beginning of slavery to the Civil War. I guarantee you, your history will be flipped on your head when you read this book or read either one of these books. Make sure you please check them out. Again, head on over to the La Jolla Playhouse.org website. Get information about their spectacular shows, Banging It, coming up. Also, I talked to you a little bit about what was happening over at the Old Globe, Trouble in Mind, started on February 5th. We'll be running through March 13th. And of course, we will have the Great Con here at San Diego Repertory Theatre, directed by Jess McLeod, written by Michael Gene Sullivan, who is our next guest on We Are Listening, coming up on Monday, February 21st, same time, right here, 6 o'clock on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you go ahead on over to our Facebook page or our YouTube page, set a reminder. And also remember that you can catch all of our archive episodes at San Diego Repertory Theater's YouTube page and Facebook page. Of course, at La Jolla Playhouse's YouTube page. And also, I'll get caught up on the episodes. Make sure you check out our podcast, which you can find on Spotify under We Are Listening. Make sure you loop back around. Catch us on February 21st, 6 p.m. as we will be talking to the amazing Michael Gene Sullivan. That is going to do it for this episode of We Are Listening. My name is Ahmed Kenyatta Dents. If you have any questions, concerns, know of someone who might make a great guest on We Are Listening, want to be a guest on We Are Listening, or even just want to correct me on anything that I shared, any of the comments or anything on any of the great conversations that Jacole and I have had with our spectacular guests, go ahead, send me an email at adents@sdrep.org. I just threw it on the screen right there. If you have questions and want more details about We Are Listening, please contact me. Ahmed Dents at adents@sdrep.org. That will do it for this episode of We Are Listening. I hope to see you here at the Rep for Kuma Fest coming up in a couple of weeks. I definitely want to see you in the house to check out Michael Gene Sullivan's The Great Con. It is going to be an absolutely spectacular play. I am out. Have a good night, and I will talk to you in a couple of weeks right here in We Are Listening.